Well, good afternoon, everyone, and it's very nice to meet you all, albeit online, this afternoon for our first tutorial. I expect it to be the first of three, I think, on the Introduction to Political Ideologies. That is, context, ideas, and practices. And we shall address the kinds of questions that you have raised. Some of you have sent questions in to me earlier, and I'll respond to those first. I'll read out the questions and provide responses, which I hope will, settle the issues for you or go towards some way towards that. We can then open up for live discussion. Okay, well, I've had 4 questions from yourselves, from Yogesh Kumar, Rishi Mohan, Ashutosh Upreti, and Sachin Kumar. I'm very glad to receive them. Well, I'll take the first set first. There are 3 questions here. Can we say that neoliberal attitudes and conservative attitudes on the economy are one and the same? That's the first question. Secondly, also asked by Yogesh Kumar, is there a similarity between populism and conservatism? Thirdly, is it right to blame the rise of authoritative, I think, do you mean authoritarian, statesmen in the world on the neoliberal economic policies? Very good questions, just like all the others that all of you have asked. Well, first of all, are neoliberal attitudes and conservative attitudes on the economy one and the same? Well, here we need to look at the nature of the 2 different outlooks. Conservatism is an outlook or an attitude, while liberalism in its many forms is a very explicit and often highly articulated body of theory, which is intended to issue into corresponding and commensurate practice. Okay, the economy, as I'm sure you remember, have a look at chapter 1 of the book if you can get to it, or listen to the Conservatism lecture, the opening lectures 1 and 2. Conservatism is an attitude or outlook, and it says basically we're self-seeking beings, and our main concern in life is to advance our family's interests, generally by advancing our own. And remember, conservatism is an outlook. It regards people as flawed beings, and according to conservatism, we can't create perfect societies because we're not perfect people, we're not perfect beings. But conservatism says, according to conservatism, society is best served by leaving people to advance their own interests within very broad limits, which are imposed by the law and by social convention, and that planned systems, planned economies, and planned states don't work because we're not susceptible to planning, and they will inevitably fail. There's a great deal of evidence that a conservative could adduce or put forward. But a neoliberal attitude to the economy is an explicit body of theory. There's an enormous amount written by neoliberals and about neoliberals on this. Neoliberalism requires a strongly conservative social philosophy or a strongly conservative morality. And that is very explicit. That is something that neoliberalism requires if its economic approach, which is often close to very extreme laissez-faire or even libertarian policies. Now, neoliberalism requires a very strongly conservative moral philosophy, a strong theory of the family, and a strong theory of how families are to be maintained by those living in them, family conduct, and so on. And it does state these commitments, or neoliberal theorists do state these commitments explicitly. It has been argued that neoliberalism requires such commitments if, as a political economy, it is to function at all. There's a significant difference, I suggest, for you between conservatism and neoliberalism on the economy. We should also remember that neoliberalism is often concerned with the market as the most efficient distributor of goods and rewards and punishments in the form of economic failure or poverty, while conservatism can allow for a degree of responsibility on the part of those in the upper reaches of society towards those below them. Remember that conservative outlook requires a sense of hierarchy and authority and regards these as natural in the evolution of society. And that then means not just that we might hold a higher position, but that we have responsibilities to those who have to take our orders or for whom we have various kinds of responsibility or over whom we have command. So that could imply a very significant difference between neoliberalism and conservatism. For neoliberalism, whoever does well in the market, well, deserves to. Conservatism also says that, but as we've seen, conservatism faces significant challenges and hasn't often got a response when the operation of the market challenges existing social institutions or long-established institutions and practices. So I hope that goes some way towards addressing your concern. You might like to read those chapters of the book again, or to look at the particular lectures again, and come to your own informed conclusion as to whether neoliberalism and conservatism are one and the same. My argument, for which I've tried to offer evidence, is that they're not. But think about it more, and I hope what I've said helps you. Your second question: is there a similarity between populism and conservatism? Once again, remember that a conservative outlook, is perfectly comfortable with and even requires hierarchy and authority and a respect for hierarchy and authority. The idea of an officer class or a ruling class, an elite class, goes with conservatism. And with conservatism goes a sense of the importance and the value, the need to preserve existing institutions, practices, and so on in society. Religious institutions, educational institutions, the law, marriage and the family, and so on. Now, populism, yes, that is not a topic I've explicitly covered in the course or in the set book for it. But populism seems to require, or seems to go with, so to speak, often very charismatic leaders, many of whom love publicity, who seem to be able to relate or to energize support from substantial sections, at times very substantial sections of the public, outside the formal and official political process, or often in direct challenge to it. And that might mark a significant difference between populism and conservatism. We need to note, you may be aware of this, very recently the British press have carried items asking if the Conservative Party itself hasn't been, so to speak, taken over by hard-right fringe conservatives, or people who would have been hard-right fringe conservatives even 10 or 15 years ago. That's something you might want to bear in mind. So, populism, well, there are significant differences between populism and conservatism. Conservatives have no problem with hierarchy and authority, with people who are fit to lead, but they also have to be capable of maintaining the stabilities of society, and that means respecting the institutions and practices that have withstood the test of time. Your third question: is it right to blame the rise of authoritarian statesmen in the world solely on neoliberal economic policies? Very good question. Think about this. Neoliberalism and liberalism in general, including liberalism in general, require that we see ourselves as free-willing individual agents. The individual is the basic unit of society within all forms of liberalism. Now, that then implies, liberalism itself implies, and we've seen this in the critiques of liberalism, in the liberalism lectures, and also in the concluding ones on republicanism and citizenship, which I've started with a critique by Republican thinkers, and that's not American Party Republicans, but people who think about Republican forms of society, like the Republic of India, for example. Well, critics of liberalism point out that in the end, the individual's choices are all but sacrosanct. Liberalism often has very few resources with which to challenge the idea that we are free to choose whatever we like in our ways of life, sexual orientations, marriage partners, you name it, occupations, and so on. Now, this then means that if our choices are, so to speak, sacrosanct, if choosing is the essence of personhood, then our choices cannot be questioned. And that goes with a consequence of neoliberal economics, which is that as long as we keep consuming, it doesn't matter what we choose to consume. That's a consequence of neoliberalism. How neoliberalism can reconcile this with strongly conservative social and moral philosophy is another matter. But one result is that we can and frequently do end up unable to argue and argue reasoningly with evidence about the nature of choices. This also means we can't ask about the context of choice, the context of our decisions. We can't ask whether our decisions were coerced or whether we were brainwashed or bullied into something or seduced by advertising into consuming things which may well be junk or may well be harmful to us, and so on. I said may well be. Look at the evidence. The difficulty with neoliberal policies is that ultimately under such systems we are no more than consumers, and whoever consumes most, well, the most that we're consuming is the best thing because most people consume it, or the greatest number of people consume it. That inevitably leads to our feeling, or seems to lead inevitably to a feeling of dispossession and disconnection. And it is precisely into that space where we think, nothing we say makes any difference, even listening to people makes no difference. It is into that space that authoritarian politicians often step with great success, and the historical record of that is not very pleasant, as I'm sure you are well aware. Okay, I hope I've addressed your questions. Rishi Mohan, 2 questions. What's the difference between liberal political theory and liberalism? Secondly, do we need to write an essay for the course? I'll answer the second one first. It's a practical one about organising the course. No, you don't, but in about week 7 or week 8, I shall set an essay drafting exercise, which will be graded for, I think, 10%. Plenty of advice on it. You'll have written instructions on the website and so on, so that you get an idea how to draft evaluative essays, argumentative essays on this kind of course. We'll combine 2 topics as well for the exam. We'll talk about the exam a bit later in response to another question. Okay, I hope that helps. Yes, it won't be a fully written essay, but a drafted one to give you practice for the exam. And if you're going to do that, I strongly advise that you do it, and if you take it seriously, you will, I hope, learn something of the craft of essay writing in this kind of area. The difference between liberal political theory and liberalism, well, there are always going to be tensions between political theory and their expressions in practice. A great many liberals have not always been happy about the ways in which political systems and politicians who claim to be liberals have gone about implementing liberal policies and liberal ideas. There's no obvious difference. We need to remember that there will be specific differences, yes. We also need to remember that the historical record of any system does not exhaust or express all the possibilities inherent in the ideas. I have mentioned this in the book, and I mentioned it in the lectures. Yes, we do attack Marxism for the record of an awful lot of communist countries, and we are often absolutely right to do so with the evidence. Much of the evidence is very ugly indeed. But think how much less we relate, say, the conduct of purportedly liberal states to liberal theory. For example, I mentioned this in the lectures, Domenico Losurdo, in a fine book on liberalism and colonialism, has shown how liberalism went hand in hand with colonialism. John Stuart Mill himself said liberalism would have to be imposed on India by force because Indians couldn't understand its ideas, or the idea of rights, the idea of individuals, and so on. Secondly, the imposition of liberalism did go hand in hand, was historically located in a period of the emergence of a mercantile trading bourgeoisie, who domestically, certainly in the United Kingdom, Great Britain, were a great challenge to the aristocracy. But liberalism has gone hand in hand with, well, colonialism, imperialism, and a long legacy of racism. And you will of course be familiar with the post-war history of the United States, one of the countries most committed in its society and its politics, its constitution as well, to liberal ideas. Now, my point here is that the historical record of those countries does not exhaust the ideas in liberalism, which have themselves served to bring us a great many very significant protections and even liberations. The record is complex, but remember, the relation between the history of ideas and a particular range of implementations of a set of ideas is always going to be tense, and the historical record is never the complete story. I hope that helps. Okay, Ashutosh Upreti, yes? The format of the final exam? Yeah. 2 papers, and they look virtually identical in form. They are virtually identical in form. Section A, 2 sections. Section A, 50 multiple choice questions. And each of those range of choices will be 4 choices to every question, and choose one. Just A, B, C, D, whichever you think is the correct answer. Put that in. These are, I understand, machine read. Okay, section B in both papers is the same. 2 essays with clear instructions on approaching them. Don't leave either of them blank. Write something down. They invite you, each question, there are 4 questions in all, 2 in each paper, 25 marks each. Each question asks you to evaluate similarities and differences between 2 of the ideologies we've covered. So in all, you'll be covering 8 of them. Very roughly, if you know the main points and the main problems and a couple of examples in the ideologies you study for the exam, you'll probably be all right. 2 essays, about 1,000 to 1,200 words each. And if you know the main points, if you know the main problems and can back what you say with examples, you will be asked to evaluate the relation between 4 pairs of ideologies. That's the task. So 1,000 to 1,200 words, which I suppose will take you, I would guess, about an hour each to do. I'm looking at 3 hours for each paper in all, 50 multiple choice questions, might well take you an hour, and I expect roughly about an hour for 2 essays of 1,000 words, 1,000 to 1,200 words each. Okay, I hope that helps you. If you'd like to raise further questions, put them through the forum or come back to our next tutorial. Okay, that's the format of the final exam. There is no essay on this course. There will be an essay drafting exercise, which is, my students have always found this immensely helpful in all my many decades in the classroom. I hope you will too. I will send advice, it'll be on the portal, on how to go about the drafting, and I will set a question which will require you to do something similar to what you'll have to do with the essay questions in the exam, right? So it'll be a kind of, I hope a net practice for the essay questions in the exam. Right, you have a question as well, Ashutosh, about multiculturalism. The compositional setup of multiculturalism with regard to India vis-a-vis the Western countries. Well, you said, as we know, the US and most of Europe, as well as whole of South America, are homogeneous in terms of religion and culture. I'll just start with that. That is simply not the case. It just is not the case, and hasn't been for, thousands of years. Okay, the United States, the biggest minority in the United States is African Americans, about 12 to 14% of the population, brought there as slaves. They played an enormous part in the development of American industrial capitalism by providing cheap slave labor. Secondly, the United States has always welcomed You know the famous saying, "Send me your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." That, I think, is written at the foot of the Statue of Liberty. The United States has always done that. Chinese and Japanese Americans, Chinese laborers were employed in building the railroads in the 1880s. And of course, the United States itself was already occupied long before the northern European settlers arrived there in the 16th and 17th centuries, from 16th century, 17th century onwards, by American Indians, whom we call them that today, Native Americans. That was true also of Canada. As for other civilizations, well, the history of Europe, well, where do I start? The Picts in Scotland have, I think, died out. I think the Pictish language is dead. Gaelic flourishes, there are Gaelic speakers. Irish Gaelic is, I understand, a somewhat different form of the same language. Welsh is spoken. The Angles, the term East Anglia, Eastern England, where I worked for a time, refers to the Angles who came from Europe. The Saxons were brought in by the Romans, by the way, as mercenaries, I understand, to help quell rebellions in Scotland, but they soon turned on the Romans themselves. The history of the whole world is a history of multiple ethnicities and multiple languages and cultures and religions, and significant changes in those as we've always gone along. The whole world is multicultural. Humans also, as the evidence now shows, have inbred not only with one another, but with other earlier hominids, in a great many places. And the evidence is covered in the book. There's more evidence that's come out since then. And therefore, I would suggest you take a look again at very accessible accounts of the multiplicity of cultures, of ethnic inheritances, and so on throughout the world. I don't know which part of the world actually has a single multicultural society. Perhaps some isolated islands in the Pacific, or some remote tribes in parts of South America. Some have been occasionally encountered, are genuinely monocultural. But Brazil itself is a highly multicultural society. Have a look. That's my response, and I hope that helps you. What sense can we make of the idea of a monocultural society? Of course, we must not assume that other people's histories are of a single form. Have a look. Please have a look. Okay. The United States has no state religion, and has a great many Christian denominations. If you have a look at the chapter on fundamentalism, or listen to the lecture on fundamentalism from the course, you'll see that there are a great many different faiths within the Christian denomination, a great many different denominations and a great many different faiths, and there's an explicit separation between faith and the state, even if in practice we may see there are pressures on that separation. Have a look, for example, at the case of the Moslems and why they removed their children to a school run by people from their own very, very hardline fundamentalist Protestant sect. Right? M-O-Z-E-R-T. The case is on the net, it's in the book. And I hope that responds to your question. Okay, but your question about the difference between Hinduism and Hindutva, well, I'm really not sure how to answer that, but you may well want to ask yourself if there is such a thing as a single, so to speak, monodoctrinal or unidoctrinal Hinduism. And I suggest you have a look at that, particularly the changes that the religion, the Aryans, made, the adaptations and adoptions they made as they moved south into southern India. Have a look at those. The historical material is very readily accessible. And your suggestion that Hindutva is the new normal for the nationalism of the 21st century, well, people who follow it may think it is, but take a look at the evidence. It's rather more complex than that, and you may well find that there's plenty of divergence from that, and there's plenty of variation even in the practice of Hinduism, even among, no doubt, people who hold or assert that they hold to some form of Hindutva. So I'd suggest the picture is rather more complex. If you do think it's the new normal, yes, I suggest you find evidence to support that, and also find counter evidence to show that the picture is much more complex than that. and try and reach your own informed conclusion, and I'm welcome to discuss that further with yourself. I'm happy to do that. Okay, now, some of you have raised questions here. I hope I've got these right. I should go back to the earlier questions. I'll try and respond to them. Many of you have, it's very heartening that you asked a lot of questions. Let's start at the top. Sachin Unplugged. Well, yes, I'm enjoying talking to all of you. Right, the graded essay. Well, yes, it is now on the portal. It will be in week 7 or 8. I did check with the NPTEL team that I could introduce this, and their clear advice was, yes, that I could introduce it in week 7 or 8. You will get clear written instructions. I do this with all my classes, by the way, not just on the NPTEL, but absolutely every class I've ever taught, on how to approach it. It's worth 10% of the marks. You'll get advice on how to draft it. It's an essay drafting exercise. That's all it is. It counts for 10%. I strongly advise that you do it because it will help you greatly with the craft of writing an essay in the exam, right? So it will show you how to do it. And we are learning not just content, but also craft as we go through this course. I hope that helps, yeah? Don't panic. There won't be any nasty surprises, and there'll be clear advice on how to go about the drafting so that you can structure the essay, right? That'll be done. And please come back to me or come back to our teaching team, our TA's team on the forum if you need further advice on that. Okay, Sachin Unplugged, what are some reflections about the neoliberal character of the state on the economy? I'm not sure I fully understand the question, because you've followed that up by asking, is the increasing shift from structural developments to inflation targeting also under its character? Well, you've asked some big questions here, but you're perfectly free to do that. Yes. I can certainly say what I think about the impact of neoliberalism on the economy, but I'll suggest that you take a look at whether any economy in the world today that purports to be run on neoliberal lines is quite as neoliberal as it looks. I say this because even in the 1980s, in the time of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, and significant claims that the public sector was wasteful and inefficient and needed to be cut back, many very serious political economists pointed out that the state wasn't actually cutting its expenditure. It was redirecting it in a great many, other ways. There's a paper by Keen Birch, B-I-R-C-H, which is, I think, freely accessible on the net, like a lot of his work, which asks the question, have we ever been neoliberal? You may well find that neoliberals and politicians differ on this, where neoliberals would much prefer the state genuinely to be cut back and to retain only the functions neoliberals approve of, which is tough law and order, tough defense policy, and so on, and leave as much as possible to the market. But have we ever been neoliberal? Some of you may have seen an item on the front page of the New Indian Express. That's where I saw it on the net. It may well have been on the Indian Express as a whole. On the 31st of January, I think it was a Friday, and that's 2020. And the front page lead news item said that the public sector banks in India, I understand that 3/4 of the banks are in the public sector, were being, this was the word that the government was actually, that the government goads, that was the word used in the headline, the public sector banks to lend more. This presumably with a view to getting the economy going again. Now, a neoliberal would find that very hard to take. For a neoliberal, the economy has to be left to itself. If businesses fail, they must be left to fail. According to neoliberalism, better ones will emerge and they'll be better equipped to survive in market conditions. But here's the central government of India today, in the last few weeks, doing the kind of thing that, a moderate Keynesian might advise. Get the public sector banks to loan more to startups and to businesses which are struggling, and so on. And don't worry so much about defaults or what have often been called bad loans. The question there then is the state quite as neoliberal as it looks? I'll offer you the example of Robert Nozick, the American libertarian. He was actually a very extreme neoliberal, who in the early 1980s abandoned neoliberalism. I've mentioned a paper by Metcalfe in the course. It's also cited in the book, if I'm not mistaken. And Metcalfe wrote a long analysis, I think in the American news magazine Salon, on how and why Nozick gave up neoliberalism. In the early 80s, 3 or 4 years after Reagan had been elected, Nozick abandoned neoliberalism, saying the price we were paying for it is too high in terms of an economic slump, the loss of job security, of even reasonable certainty of tenure of jobs, and so on. So, are we actually a neoliberal economy anywhere in the world? Think again. Take a closer look at what the state's actually spending its money on, and certainly take a look at the recent government of India's advice to the public sector banks, pretty well instruction, if you like, to start lending more, irrespective of, and to stop being so worried about defaults and bad loans. I hope that helps. Abhishek Sharma, good afternoon. I look forward to receiving a question from yourself. Give me a moment, I'm just scrolling back. It's nice to have all these questions, it's really very nice. Anurag Pradhan, will you have to type the essay or write it down during the exam? I am actually not sure about this. I'll check. And I'll ask the team to put it on the portal if needed. I understand that you'll be working at the keyboard for the multiple choice questions, which are machine read. Let me check and get back to you, please. You could, of course, email your question on the forum, and I'll try and get back to you over it. But thanks for raising it. You may just want to raise it as a question on the forum. I haven't thought of this very much. My guess is it'll probably take you the same kind of time to write 1,000 to 1,200 words on the keyboard as it would to write it by hand. But I'll check that and get back to you. I'm sorry I haven't got a ready answer for you. Okay, Red Samsung. Liberalism gave rise to capitalism. Yes, it did. Right, liberalism, you will remember, was advanced by an emerging merchant class, a mercantile and trading class, particularly in Britain as the Industrial Revolution developed, and methods of accounting, in particular double entry bookkeeping, which had been in place since, if I'm not mistaken, about 1450. Was it Luca Bartolomeo de Pacioli who invented it? Now, this method of bookkeeping enables requires, if I'm not mistaken, I'm no accountant by the way, requires that for every inflow entry for a business, there must be a corresponding and equal outflow entry. This enables us to see the health of a business organization, or any organization, the financial health of it, at one go. Secondly, this enabled people to start raising loans on the promise of future profits. Technical changes around the time of the Industrial Revolution, and in shipbuilding, the size of ships and navigational techniques, meant also that people could take loans in the clear expectation and reasonable expectation of future profits from imports from what was becoming the colonized world, and from businesses in their own part of the world. As these started to succeed, these were great financial successes, they started to demand a share in political power, a share of political power. And remember that this kind of trading system cut across religious calendars, cut across monarchical orders on what should be done when, and so on. And it also started to cut across feudal societies. But this kind of system requires that profits continue to be made, and the surest way to do that is, as we have seen, to use the labor of people, to buy the labor power of people, make them work for longer than it takes to refresh their labor power. And that's where the surplus value is generated. So yes, there is a direct connection between the advance of liberalism as a body of ideas and practice and the rise of capitalism. Yeah? Okay. I mean, if you're interested, read the chapter on liberalism and on Marx. Read them together and you'll see the sequence. Okay, another question. India's political discourse, is it being led by fascist elements? Well, you'll remember when we concluded the fascism topic, we looked at a number of incisive short items on whether the United States was becoming a fascist state or whether it had become one or not. My answer is, do please look, and do please look at a range of analyses. There are many very thoughtful and analytical commentaries on whether India is or is not becoming a fascist state, or whether it has become a fascist state or not. I'll offer you things to keep in mind as you read. Read a wide range of things. There's a lot of very high quality analytical material available on the net, and it may surprise you, in the more serious newspapers. But things to look for. Take a look at the Naomi Wolf article. The kinds of things a fascist must set up: a tugcast, a climate of fear and intimidation, a willingness to use violence, the creation of an internal enemy. Those would be things in favor of the argument. Against it might be responses such as this, and these were made in responses to Naomi Wolf. That's at the end of lecture 1, the seminar exercise. The kinds of things that were said in response hold on. The United States still has a constitution and follows it. It has a Supreme Court. It wasn't said in the responses that we covered, but I'll add this. Under the Constitution of the United States, the elected federal legislature, the Congress, which is made up of 2 chambers, the representatives, the House of Representatives, and the Senate, that Congress has virtually total power over the executive, over the presidency. Now that's still very much a constitutional system. I'll invite you to look at India in the light of those factors. If you like, draw up 2 columns. Yes, India is going in a fascistic direction. You may well find evidence for that. No, it's not. You may well find evidence for that. In fact, you will find evidence for both. And then I suggest reach your own conclusion. The Supreme Court's judgments are still respected by all throughout India. They're binding on everyone in Indian territory, right? Binding, that's that. And they're not necessarily what we would call fascist. Look at Shafin Jahan, for example, the judgment in Shafin Jahan, and so on. So, yes, you will find evidence for both. You'll find disturbing evidence for both, and heartening evidence for both. I hope that addresses your concern, yeah? Okay, something else you'd like. Fascism and social Darwinism, well, that's such an unplugged. I'm not sure if there's a direct connection between fascism and social Darwinism. Social Darwinism is very roughly the idea that society evolves in a kind of Darwinian way. Those who are fit to rise to the top, and they deserve it. That would be that's consistent with conservatism. Fascism, on the other hand, yes, has an explicit doctrine of racial and ethnic hierarchies. In the case of Nazism, it's very, very extreme, that doctrine, and all but requires mass extermination. It certainly requires mass racial suppression. But fascism asserts that particular racial groups are superior to all others. These claims are made in many forms around the world. They're not confined to Nazism or Italian fascism. They're made around the world and made in many different contexts, and have been made in India often very openly. You'll find the evidence for that. But social Darwinism, the point is that fascism then requires the creation of a rigid, unchanging, permanently stratified society on the grounds of effectively a racial hierarchy. Social Darwinism recognizes that people rise to the top if they deserve to do so, and is therefore much less rigid in conception. No, conservatives do have serious problems over the idea of fascism, even if there are some possibly uncomfortable resonances of fascism in certain conservative doctrines. So I hope that addresses your question. Anurag Pradhan, you've asked another question. Suppose there comes a question in the exam relating fascistic elements with the contemporary examples. What if my viewpoint is contrary to the invigilator? How would the answer be evaluated? I can tell you exactly how. We shall look to see your reasonable knowledge of the key points in fascism and any other doctrine with which it might be correlated in the exam. Obviously, I'm not going to say now. You come to the exam and find out. But we're looking for your reasonable authoritative knowledge grounded in the set text and in the video lectures, the recorded lectures, of the two ideologies concerned. One may be fascism, one may be something else, it doesn't matter what. If you've got the main ideas, the main concepts, and the main problems in both, and examples to back what you say and reach a reasoned conclusion, that will be fine. Yes, you can reach an argued, reasoned conclusion, and that's what we're looking for. Can you back what you conclude? Your conclusion must follow from the ideas, from the key points and the examples and the key points for and against that you've given. Yep, I hope that helps. That will be in the essay drafting instructions as well. Nope, you can back any argument you like, but you've got to back it as an argument. Unsupported assertion is not acceptable. We need knowledgeable argument based on a knowledge of the main idea of the ideologies you've covered, and examples argued, examples to support what you say. I hope that helps. Come back again if you need further clarification on that. Is there any political party, Abhishek Sharma, is there any political party which is actually liberal? Good question, I don't know. Yes, a great many political parties have got policies which we would recognize as liberal. For example, I went to a family friend's wedding in Kerala some weeks ago, perhaps a fortnight or 3 weeks ago. The actual wedding was held on a Sunday in a community hall not far from the village where I was staying, where my friends have their homes. They're a family who have 2 or 3 homes close to one another. And I went along, well in time. We all sat in this big hall. There was no priest. There was a registry official with a large book. I think, because it was a big hall, I couldn't hear what was being said on stage, I think they read out a ceremony of marriage. The young woman and the young man signed their names in the book, and the official went away. We all then went and had lunch, and then lots of people came to a very enjoyable dinner in the evening. The following day, I was talking to the young man's father, because it was his family that I happened to know, and I said, no priest. And he said we were speaking Tamil. I mean, they speak Malayalam, of course, but they very kindly speak Tamil for my sake, in conversation with me, or English. And he said, yes, the young woman, the bride's father, is a communist and a trade unionist. I said, well, I too am a trade unionist. I'm a member of one of the British teachers' unions. I still am. Joined it many years ago, and I still am, and I'm allowed to be. And I carry on paying my, I think I paid a long-term sub of some kind. But the bride's father said, no religion, no priests. Now, we could find a liberal defense of that. We could say it is no business of anyone's to decide whether somebody has a completely non-religious wedding or not. That would be a liberal principle. And you'll find, therefore, that in practice in India, a great deal follows liberal principles, even if they're not explicitly stated. And a great many parties have got liberal elements in their thinking. So there may be no explicitly liberal party in India, but we will find parties that support what look like neoliberal economic policies. We'll find plenty that support what look like liberal social policies or liberal social ideas. It is certainly possible to have organized liberal parties, most certainly so. Anyone who wants one can start one. There's nothing against that in the Constitution of India or in the law of the Republic of India. Yes, unorganized general liberal sentiment, well, that's certainly possible. And if somebody wants to start an explicitly liberal political party, I'm sure they can do so. Right? I have no doubt whatsoever that is perfectly constitutional within the Republic of India. Nozick, yes, I have mentioned Nozick. Is he a semi-anarchist or a libertarian? I don't know. He is a very, very hardline, or was for a long time, a hardline libertarian. Is he an anarchist? He's called himself an anarchist, but it probably doesn't matter which category we put him into. It's far more important to look at the reasons he took the positions he did and to specify the positions. For example, he does stretch the question whether Kant, the philosopher Immanuel Kant, is a liberal or not, precisely because he reads Kant in such a way as to make taxation a moral evil for violating the individual's right to maintain their personhood by keeping the fruits of their labors. Whether that's a justifiable reading of Kant is another matter, and my own former PhD supervisor, now Professor Lord Raymond Plant, as he has been for about 30 years, has forcefully refuted that argument by saying that if we, that if we are seriously sick or starving, we are not free, willing, autonomous beings, and therefore that minimum conditions for agency have to be met if we are to be human beings in Kant's sense at all. I'll leave it to you to decide whether you want to place Nozick in any one category or not. Read the arguments and read the changes in his thinking as time went by, and then I leave that to decide for yourself. Yes, I know this Ideologies course talks about liberalism and fascism and conservatism and so on, and feminism and so on, but my aim was to convey the specific arguments to you so that you could reach informed evaluations, in your own thinking. And I hope that counts as an answer. Is Nozick an anarchist or a semi-anarchist or a libertarian? The answer is, I don't know, and it may not matter. But I'll leave that to you. Okay, is Nozick nearer to liberalism? Well, he may be. Find the reasons for saying that. Find the reasons for saying he's closer to anarchism. Right? I'll leave that to you. He may be, as some have called him, a libertarian. A very extreme anarchist. But I'll leave that to you. And my hope would be that you would learn about Nozick's specific arguments and about the specific themes, the specific arguments involved in what it is to be an anarchist or a liberal or a libertarian. Anurag Pradhan, Indian examples too. Well, yes, there are plenty in the lectures and plenty in the book. I've just given you one from the Indian Express front page of the 31st of January 2020. You'll find plenty. Not being exposed to US history, well, I've tried to specify what was happening, and I hope that has helped you. Much of this is very widely available, and, serious sections of the Indian press carry out a great deal of international news and commentary. You'll be well aware of the issues involved, and we don't have to look very far on the net, but I take your point in these discussions. If you like, I'll try and use more Indian examples. I'm perfectly happy to do that, but you will find them in the book and in the seminar documents. Look at the seminar documents. They're coming with PowerPoints, listed with PowerPoints. I can't put the content up for copyright reasons, but I can give you the links, and the links and titles are not copyright. Look those up. You'll find plenty of Indian examples, right? And I hope that helps. Babu Rao, good evening. You have a question. Perhaps you could type it up. It's nice to hear from you. I'll try and scroll down here. I'm not sure I'm doing this very well. I've got to the bottom of the page. Have you a question, please, Babu Rao? I'm happy to hear from you and happy to try and respond. I'm not quite sure how this page is scrolling. Let me try it and see. Yeah. Nope, I think as far as I've got with it. No, that's about it. But if you have anything to say, please, Babu Rao, please do say it. Please put it up online. I hope you've got decent connectivity. All right, some further questions here. Anurag Pradhan again. You say, I'll read your question back. When I told my friend that you linked the rise of the RSS and the BJP to fascist elements, they said his course shall be discontinued soon or he'll be replaced. No, I haven't. Do I have any comment? No, I haven't. This course is intended to enable us to make informed judgments of a range of political and philosophic outlooks and ideas and ideologies. If that's reason for discontinuation, I want to know who's going to try it. The rise of the BJP and the RSS, well, they've been thoroughly documented and they're getting enormous amounts of public attention all around India and in many, many different countries around the world. All the documents I have drawn on are very authoritative, fully public, and have been, in some cases, for a very long time. So, well, let's see. I've just completed the concluding lecture on the course. It hasn't been discontinued. Let's see, is all I can say. Okay, I hope that's an answer to you. I have no idea. And if it is, what do you think the implications would be for the Republic of India as a republic? I'll leave that to you to think about. Okay, Babu Rao, your question, how do I view the Indian National Congress as a liberal party? The answer is I have no idea. I would suggest that if we looked at specific policies that the Congress Party has espoused and often implemented in government, whether in the states or when it has formed the union government, or when the union government has been formed from the Congress MPs in the Rajya Sabha, whether in coalition or on their own, we will find strong liberal elements. Quite a lot of the Indian Constitution, as designed by the Constituent Assembly and approved by the Constituent Assembly, include significant liberal principles. You'll remember in the seminar on liberalism, we looked at the Shafin Jahan judgment, 2018, in the Indian Supreme Court. I think it was 2018. And we saw that the right of the individual was upheld. It is in the Constitution. And the Supreme Court drew on a lot of other judgments about capacity to make decisions on our lives, but concluded that the young woman in one of the central figures in the case, Hadia Ashokan, was not in any way impaired in her capacity for judgment, and therefore that her judgment as an individual had to be respected. That's a liberal principle. It's in the Indian Constitution. And as far as I know, no political party in India has challenged that. But look at the specific policies espoused by any party, whether the Indian National Congress or not. Some of them will be consistent with liberalism, some of them may not be. I'll leave that to you, but look at the specifics, and if you want to discuss them further, do come back. Yep, read the theory and look at the specifics, and try and reach your own informed conclusion, I'd suggest. Okay, I hope that helps. Okay, the quote that neoliberalism, Sachin Unplugged again. How could I justify this quote that, I quote, neoliberalism is the political ideology of globalization? I don't think I've ever said that, but it's very likely that a lot of people have. Read the arguments. You will find arguments for and against it. You'll find plenty of arguments saying that, I mentioned Keen Birch earlier, Professor Keen Birch, saying that we've never actually been neoliberal. Globalization itself takes many different forms. There's nothing new about it. Roman coin has been found on the southeast coast of India, at the place we now call Mamallapuram in Tamil. Well, the Romans traded a great deal. They wanted spices and silks from the east and other exotic things, and prepared to pay very large sums of money. There's nothing new about globalization. The Spanish Empire was partly created by very bankrupt adventurers in Spain who went to Latin America to try and plunder Aztec gold to pay off their debts in Spain. Whether they were neoliberals or not is another matter, but there's a great deal of literature around this. I'm not that familiar with it. It is a very good question. If I use it as an essay question, I doubt I will, but I will certainly acknowledge your part in posing the question to me. Have a look, please. Have a look at the ideology of neoliberalism. Have a look at the ideological elements of globalization and the different forms of globalization, and please try and reach an argued answer, an informed response to your own question. There is a great deal of very good material on this, and you can certainly find it on the net. There's a fine amount. Even tried the heavyweight news magazines. In India, there are several outstanding ones. The EPW is truly outstanding for weight and authority. But there's so many others. News magazines, Outlook India Today, there's just ones written in English, Frontline. You don't have to agree with them, but read them. They're very authoritative. Der Spiegel International, a German news magazine, which I've used on the course for one or two of the seminars. There's a very great amount of those published in the United States. I mentioned Salon and one or two others. So have a look. You'll find very good authoritative analyses. Try a few different searches. Yeah? Okay. Raunak, one question. Yes. I'll answer that now. Anurag has asked another one. Raunak, do I think India really is a socialist country, or has it been forcefully added in the preamble? Well, I'm sure you could answer that for yourself. I'd offer a very tentative, very provisional answer. India's economy has been broadly social democratic for most of the time, and you'll probably have a closer look, you'll probably find that the state is still as heavily involved in the economy as it ever was in the Nehru period. If you're interested in doing some it's quite demanding reading on this, on the Nehru period and its successors, or the way it laid the foundation for the post-1991 economy. Have a look at Prof. Sivaramakrishna's paper in the Economic and Political Weekly, November 2007. It is slow reading. It's about 13,000 words long, very detailed and very careful. And remember that Dr. Balakrishnan is an economist. He goes into the detail. It's fascinating political economy. Slow reading. And that's just one part of my answer to your question, my response. Is it a socialist country? Well, think about what might be involved in having a socialist country. The great bulk of Western European countries after the war and Scandinavian countries accepted a great deal and ran themselves on those lines that we would regard as socialist. The state was the major guarantor of the economy, not director or controller, but major guarantor. Major industries were in state hands, public health and public education. Okay, the United Kingdom was one of two countries, the other was Cuba, which have a state-run health service. The others have a combination, a liberal combination of private and public insurance, and so on. So, is India a socialist country? Well, think about it. Are there elements of Indian everyday life which are socialist? There are elements of Indian political economy and political organization which are socialist? There may well be. I can't give you an answer, and that's a literal answer to your question. It's a very fine question. Please do think about it. And think, for example, about citizens' assemblies in Pune and the kinds of decisions they reached, and whether those were socialistic decisions or not. That's in the 12th topic, which I just concluded this afternoon. Well, Sachin, yes, thank you. And I too have enjoyed responding to your very challenging and very serious questions. I shall try and meet you again online. You've mentioned once a fortnight. I shall try to do so. I'll check with our colleagues at NPTEL how often I can do this. I think they want 3 live tutorials. I've always loved tutorials. I grew up in the British system of university education. Small group tutorials were priceless, and I loved teaching them when I started teaching during my PhD. But thank you to all, and I hope you found my answers helpful. Enjoy your reading and your thinking, and do please keep an eye on the papers, keep an eye on the heavyweight news magazines and the heavyweight articles. And I hope that what we've covered in the theory, in the Ideologies lectures, will help you. Look at the seminars, please. Look at the seminar documents. They're often short, accessible. They'll back up the lectures for you. Well, good evening, everyone, and I'm looking forward to our next conversation.